Okay, so welcome to another TQA podcast, live, in person, and probably a bit cut. So today, I'm joined by my usual partner in crime, Mr. Dylan Hackett, the Director of Innovation here at TQA. And for those of you that don't know me, I'm Ben Park, I'm the CTO at TQA. But luckily for us, we are joined today by a guest. We have Matt Faulkner. Good to see you. You're joining us from a company called Aries, and you're the founder and CEO of Aries.
Yeah, we give companies the ability to understand what they do to help their transformation or organizational change.
Amazing. Well, we've been lucky enough to play with it, haven't we? I have to say, I'm absolutely knocked out by it.
We
Super
have,
cool.
yeah. So we've known Matt for a couple of years. We've engaged on a couple of projects, specifically as well with the technology that came before Aries, which was Instruct, which I still stand by the fact that I think it's probably the best agentic platform right now out there.
Yeah.
But no, Matt's a fantastic guy, and we thought perfect for this podcast and get us talking about trust in AI, which
Absolutely.
is a subject that we are hearing a ton about.
Yes.
And a
Indeed.
lot of clients are talking about it. So we thought we'd get Matt on, being someone that literally delivers these products as well, making sure that obviously your products are secure and trustworthy. And we were talking about this before. So yeah, looking forward to the discussion today.
Absolutely. So, as you said, today's podcast is all about the subject of can we trust AI? And I think it's going to be a fascinating conversation.
Yes.
As you know, we've had a number of conversations about this before we even got here, just because it's just so interesting. I think it's worth pointing out what we're not going to talk about though is security. So we're going to sort of leave the whole kind of big questions around securing AI to the side for now. We're going to focus a little bit more on some of the more ephemeral questions around it.
Yeah, I think what we want to do is focus less on can we trust the companies behind AI, can we trust the data residency and that sort of stuff. The kind of infra side of it, as interesting as it is, and maybe we'll do another one on that. But what we want to focus on today is kind of the pure thought of like, can we trust anything that is AI? What are the barriers? What are the challenges that we might have when we're using this in an enterprise? And we have to trust it.
Indeed.
Because, you know, for us, we're developing stuff for our clients. If they go wrong, that's going to be an issue. So trust plays a massive part in that.
Yeah, quite. And we're going to explore that a little bit and talk a little bit about the so what question. You know, do we need to trust AI? I guess. I think we probably do.
Probably, but
probably
maybe,
helps.
Yeah, exactly.
But we'll get into that a little bit. So,
Yeah, a
okay.
lot to get into then.
Yeah,
Let's get
there's a lot
started.
How long have we got? Probably not long enough. So, okay. So look, let's frame the conversation. What do we mean then when we're talking about sort of trust in AI in this context? And what are we talking about here? Dylan, do you want to kick us off?
So this is important because, you know, we are incredibly lucky that we're living through the age of almost the rise of AI, right? We've seen GPT, which really kicked the whole thing off and put it in the hands of individuals. And now we're seeing it being put into effect in enterprises, and not just for sort of nice to have things. We're talking about business critical processes now. And at that point, we need to be able to trust it. We need to be able to make sure that it's going to give us consistent results, robust results, and results that are not going to do something that is outside of what we would expect our employees to do, or, you know, a human alternative. And I know we're going to get into this a little bit more, but a real theme here is what do humans do? What do robots do? What does AI do? And how do we compare those? And should we even compare them? They're two very different things. But at the crux of it, you know, we're being asked to do business critical processes using AI.
Yeah.
How can we do that successfully? How can we make sure we have the right guardrails? And how can we deliver that in a way that is robust and secure?
Indeed. Matt, obviously you're using AI all the time, right? You build it into Aries, you build it into Instruct. From your perspective, what do we mean here when we talk about trust with large language models in particular? How do they work? I mean, at a sort of fundamental level, could you explain in simple terms for our listeners a little bit about how they operate and why that might kind of set the tone in terms of trust, or how it maybe undermines the trust question?
Yeah, sure. So they're pretty imperfect as far as the way that we train them. I think classically we have algorithms where what we give as an input can completely correlate to what we get out as an output, and you can predict that. The magical thing about LLMs, but also the thing that hurts the trust, is that an input does not always yield the same output. And so at its core, what we've built is a prediction machine. It's taken into account the entire internet, all the textual content we have in the world, effectively, and then we give to it a sequence of new tokens, new things that it might not have seen before, and based on what it had seen, it tries to predict what might come next. So it's like almost filling in the gaps, or like doing a bit of abstraction over what it's seen before.
Yeah.
And then we also have 2 extra layers around post-training and fine-tuning, where we throw in more things that can degrade the trust. So particularly with fine-tuning, we will ask the model to sort of bias towards some certain result. And in doing so, we have this dynamic where we can almost bias it to the wrong angle without realizing.
Yeah.
But I think importantly, just an LLM holistically is hard to predict.
Yeah.
So I think it's hard to trust.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's some definite points around that throw, I guess, more questions in the air.
Yeah, I mean, I think most people that use some of these AIs on a day-to-day basis, ChatGPT, Claude, you get a sense that they have a kind of a different tone to them, don't they? They have a different feel, and I understand that they are sort of at a global level trained to operate in a certain way and to talk of a certain tone of voice. But then obviously you can then physically change that via direct prompt level as well, so you can get it to kind of act in a certain way. So you can create an inherent bias, can't you? And you hear a lot of talk these, or at least I hear a lot of talk these days of people sort of creating prompts specifically to try and undo that bias, you know, be as honest as possible. And I do this myself, right? I say, critique this as much as possible. Don't give me confirmation bias. I just want you to tell me the black and white. And, you know, you're still not entirely sure that it's not telling you what it wants you to hear.
I always think this is a funny, and I wonder whether we're going to resolve this over time, but I always think there's a push and a pull between us wanting these things to be more human and us wanting them to be accurate.
Yeah.
Because humans are not accurate.
Yeah.
And this is, I think, a key point, is that we always judge LLMs and we want them to be perfect, but we are not perfect. So things like bias that we've talked about before, and obviously there are some really big examples of quite publicly known sort of systems that you might be wary of, you know, certain LLMs that you might feel have bias inherently built into them, certain political views built into them, etc. That, as you say, this is fundamental to those LLMs, and quite a lot of the time we're trying to break through them. We almost want something with a bit of personality, but when it comes to it, we want to do away with all of that and get to the actual raw data, which is really difficult. And I think something that you know, you only really appreciate when you start to try and put this into place in an enterprise, right? GPT or Gemini or whatever, it just doesn't matter if I'm using it personally, right? It just doesn't have that kind of need. So it is really, really important to make sure that we understand how they work as well. As you say, then the next best engines.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think part of the problem might be that just the general public haven't been made aware of the flaws enough, and so all they've been told is it's a super intelligence, it's way smarter than you are, right? So, but they just inherently infer a degree of trust to something that is, by definition, kind of untrustable.
Yeah, I think people sort of over-index on the fact that this thing seems to so confidently say something and never question whether or not that will be real. Also, a reality of the models that people are using, they're not always on the frontier. So like we've seen over time, hallucination levels in frontier models decrease progressively. We also see that models that are asked to do web research before answering or think before answering tend to hallucinate less. But then if people don't have that education to know to ask it to do that, will you actually end up having it do that? And then kind of damning for enterprise is the fact that ultimately these same users are the ones using AI at work and for all of these things that we're talking about. So yeah, it's a tricky one.
I think there's two really, really key and important things I think maybe to take from that. One is data, right? It is relying on data that is either been trained on or that it can access. And I find this a lot when we use the tools that we have within our Office suite, that I could ask it for maybe examples of certain use cases. And because of the corpus of data that we have that includes talking about use cases that haven't materialized or blue sky thinking or just ideas and stuff like that, it doesn't recognize the context around those and pulls them in and says, oh, you've done this before. And it's not that the data isn't there, it's just that I think we miss the fact that as humans, we apply so much context to every single thing that we see. If we see something on the internet, I'm already a little bit skeptical. right? And it will, LLMs to a certain extent will do that. They will try and prioritize sources, but in lieu of any other information, how does it know that this deck is talking about something that isn't real and this deck is talking about something that is? We've talked for years about the power of data and all the rest of it, but this is where it really becomes, I would say, essential, because now the LLMs are looking at that data. It's no longer a cleaning the house thing. It's, if you want accurate stuff, you need to give the right data. You need to have your data in line, which is tricky, especially for big companies.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's the sort of the first principle, isn't it, of setting up sort of reliable and robust AI systems, is getting your data house in order. And that's a lot harder to do in practice than I think people think. But even on a personal level, from a productivity level, I've been using Claude quite a bit recently, and they've got a really neat projects feature. And you can upload information to it, so you have a context of a sort of a corpus of your own curated data. But it doesn't maintain that over time. You have to update it manually. And equally, if you leave old documentation in it, it'll use that just as readily as the newest.
Exactly.
So you have no idea if it's working from recent updates or old updates. And so it's quite a lot of overhead just to the AI doesn't know the difference, or at least it's not smart enough right now to know the difference.
I think one of the key things when you were talking that I thought about was, how on it you have to be with when you've given context to an AI in a project, or you have some sort of organization search. You just have to realize, like, the models will really push on what it's seeing. So if you're not on top of it, you have a documentation that's from the old version, not the new version, something like this. At any given point, it can pull it up. Unless what I do, I don't know if you guys are setting up similar things, but I will mark the date in, say, the name of the file, because typically they'll see the file.
Yep.
So I'll say from May 2026, and that will allow the AI to kind of prioritize it, hopefully when it's trying to formulate an answer. It's the best way I can get around it right now.
Yeah.
And I always think that when you're giving context to LLMs and to AI, and this is a big part of using AI in general, right? Giving it that extra bit of information, making sure that it can prioritize that data and it can access it in a way that is meaningful, and you're not actually, in effect, skewing the LLM away from your original sort of original point. So it is incredibly important. And sometimes I do wonder whether I want it to see everything, right? Because I often think all the documents that we have, from the LLM's point of view, stick it all in a notebook, right? As in, it is just text. It's not really got any context behind it. It's reading all of that. That is available in documents, and that's what it's regurgitating to me. It's probably, taking less of the context around, dates. Is it in a folder that says, we haven't done this yet, this is a good idea, or whatever it is? It's probably not getting that nuance that we just do, and we don't think about it. And that, I think, is the problem, is we probably don't realize what we do to be able to really instill that into the LLMs.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think we're smarter than we give ourselves credit for.
We might not be saying that in a couple of years with the new models.
We might not.
Maybe for now.
Well, it is interesting and slightly off topic here, but I was reading something the other day saying that actually when AI first came about, we assumed that, robots are going to be doing all the manual work and all the rest of it, and your lawyers and stuff are going to be the last ones, right? Because that's real knowledge work. And what we found is actually the knowledge stuff is incredibly easy.
Yeah.
That is just a case of going and training it. Something like opening a lid of a bottle or turning on a tap or something like that has taken us millions of years to evolve to do. And is actually becoming the hardest thing to do. It is far harder to get a physical robot to undo a bottle than it is to get an LLM to answer a very complicated legal question.
So I have a great example of that. We have a customer at TQA who are a big food manufacturing company, and I was very lucky a couple of years ago to be invited to go on a tour of one of their factories, and I got to see how they made a specific type of confectionery. I'm going to try not to give away the name of the because it's going to be very, very hard when I describe what it is making. So basically, imagine a small cake in a little tin that has a little red cherry on the top. You can probably guess it, maybe. Basically, we got to watch them make this thing from ingredients going into a hopper, all the way through to them being boxed at the end, and then the boxes being put in boxes. The whole thing was autonomous from start to finish. Literally, the only thing that needed humans to do was putting the cherry on the top, because the AI couldn't do it. They didn't have a robot that was capable of working out how to put cherries on like 50 of these things coming down the belt at once. It was hilarious. So they had a team of people putting cherries on.
And the cherry on top.
Do you
Literally
know
the
what?
cherry on
This is
top.
that makes me laugh because it's almost symbolic, right? Because
Really is.
I always talk about the 80-20 rule when it comes to a lot of different things, and AI in particular. You know, you can go and get it to do the big research, get it to go and find the information, but there is that human element that you need to put on top. I think, you know, we collectively, the three of us, use AI as much as anyone, right? We are in the industry and we use it all the time. But I am still better than the AI, as we all are, right?
Yeah.
We can still put our sort of mark on it, even if it is just that cherry on top.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
There's a real thing to be said about knowing your own abilities, whether it is the taste of knowing what should be put out there. For example, one thing I was talking about this morning with the team was kind of the relationship we had with clients and the ability to read the room of like what you can say and what you should say and what their expectations are. Things that only come up through conversation that you've had. And I think, you know, I know that an AI will be able to throw together a presentation, but I'm usually the one to articulate what I want it to be. But to go to the, I guess the factory actually that you saw, one of the key things that I think about when it comes to this is someone's got to be accountable for the output, right? Even if there's a machine doing that work, who is the person that you blame when the factory shuts down or the cherries can't be placed because everything's too gooey or broken? Like, this is something where I think in our work, in enterprise AI, if you have the AI producing some form of output and that output goes wrong, do you have someone who's accountable? Should you have someone who's accountable?
I mean, so I was going to try and pick up on something you said earlier around confidence, and I think we should come back to that because that is a big thing around trust. LLMs are too confident, in my opinion. But you're right. It is worth talking about this ownership and responsibility. I mean, Ben, you have heard me hark on about this so much, but I think we have a real problem about the fact that there is no such thing as consequence for AI.
Yeah.
And actually, beyond that, it's not even that there's no consequence. We will willingly go to it again and again and again, despite the fact that it gives us wrong answers or does something incorrectly, which is really interesting because almost nothing else acts like that, right? That we will continuously, Claude can tell me wrong stuff all day long, and I'll blame myself. And I'll still come back to it the next day and the next day and keep on asking for it. But and we were talking about this the other day. I always think of, there was a South Park episode where there was an oil spill and the CEO had to say, "I'm sorry," and it was so, you know, nothing behind it, very superficial. And I always think of that when I think of LLMs doing something wrong, because you will have absolutely come across a situation where an LLM doesn't do something you want and you call it out, and what does it do? Says sorry.
Yeah,
No,
and it
really
identifies that it's done the error.
Yeah.
It knows in that moment.
That almost annoys me more when it goes, "Oh yes, I did this, and then I ignored this, and did that." I'm almost like, "Come on, you know that you're doing it. Don't do it." Now, we do have to appreciate that it's incredibly complex to have LLMs doing even what they're doing. So we can't, you know, bash them too much for you know, making mistakes. But I think the crux of it is, again, there is no consequences to those mistakes. If we you know, do wrong in our work, there is consequences. There's a boss above us that might have something to say about it. There's a board that might have something to say about it, etc., etc. There are real consequences to us. There is no consequences to an LLM.
So what you're basically saying is that AI has no fear. It's not afraid of failure.
It doesn't have to. What are the implications when AI fails? To the AI, I would argue almost nothing. Especially when you think it can't feel, you know, pain and all the rest of it in theory.
Yeah.
So even being turned off doesn't seem like that would be too much of an incentive. Now, I wonder whether there are things that we can kind of lock onto to get that. And I think that's probably, you know, where the future will go, is trying to almost humanize AI to a certain extent, to put some of these effects in that will allow us, or allow the AI to maybe think a little bit more like we do with consequence. Because, I mean, it is intensely frustrating, even doing it personally, when you get wrong answers. It is not just frustrating, it is incredibly difficult when we're in client sites, trying to make sure that it goes right and that, testing it to the nth degree, making sure that everything is absolutely perfect. Because if the AI has no responsibility, it lands on us.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it's interesting. You may recall we had a conversation the other day, didn't I? I was telling you I did some research a few years ago around the utility of AI and where the utility starts to drop off if your goal is to make it seem human-like, but then it gets close but doesn't quite get there. You get this kind of effect called the uncanny valley, where you sort of actually start to feel revulsion rather than attraction, because fundamentally it's almost like being human but not enough, so it's not real. Whereas actually if you kind of work with AI on the basis that it's just a tool to use, you'll forgive its mistakes. But the more you humanize it and the more you try and make it a reflection or a mirror of yourself, the more you won't forgive its mistakes, whether they're real or inferred, and the utility starts to drop off. And I think there's a really fine line or balance between being good enough to be useful as a tool and then no longer being useful as a tool because we've passed that line where we try to humanize it. Now that could mean giving it all sorts of emotions. Now being happy might be fine. It might get annoying, like a breakfast radio DJ, but ultimately you're never going to stop using it because it's happy. But if it doesn't have fear of failure, if it doesn't have fear, that has a consequence because it doesn't care when it makes mistakes. But equally, if it had fear, assuming that we can get past the notion of sentience and that an AI isn't necessarily self-aware, so it'd probably be trained fear, not necessarily inherent fear, that could drive different behaviors that are actually some of those behaviors that the sci-fi novelists, argue could be the worst case scenario. That it will start to self-replicate because it thinks we're going to switch it off. I mean, I'm extrapolating here, but what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, that would be a whole podcast in itself where we would talk about this. I think the side of the side of research around safety, AI safety, and understanding that and interpretability. This is quite important to overall the trust of the models, and also how, as we shift them towards more human-like behavior. And one of the big examples of that in the last couple of years has been reasoning models. Yeah. These are models that are reasoning in English language, like you might do in your brain. Yeah. Right? Should I do this? Oh, did I make a mistake? These models will go through that in their chain of thought. Yeah. And I think that came out of interpretability research to say, well, how can we better understand what these models do? So I think we should push the models to be more like humans in those ways, where we know that before I say something, I question, will this be the right thing to say? Could I have made a mistake? Exactly. Yeah. So with an AI, I think we should be pushing to that area. One thing I will say is, I think just the nature of the ways that LLMs are trained today, they're not trying to be malicious. Mm-hmm. And so that gap in trust of can we get it? We trust it 99.9% of the time. How can we almost move to a trustless model where we don't have to have full trust? 100% trust will probably never come. Yeah. But we can confidently let the AI do its work without worrying about it. This is one of the things that I'm particularly interested in.
Yeah, it's funny because I was thinking about this the other day, and we've talked about this before in terms of the frontier models are jacks of all trades, right? They're supposed to be fantastically good at just about everything. Each model has its own sort of pros and cons and things like that, but they're kind of jack of all trades. We've been talking more recently about is that the most cost-effective way and the better way to do it? Because it's almost like, there's anecdotally humans that know more kind of almost struggle because they question more. The more that, ignorance is bliss, right? So is a small 2B open source model that's good enough to do what we need to do for a particular process, is that not actually the better way to do it? Because you're not having to deal with a frontier model that is almost complicating things because it knows too much. It's questioning itself, etc., etc. Yeah. Right now we typically use the same models for everything, and I strongly believe we're going to move into a world where we look at those models and say, this can be tailored and configured towards this very slim business problem, and that's what we'll do. We will not use AI models that want to boil the ocean in order to solve one particular problem. But I don't know what you've felt with that, because Aries, I mean, there's a lot obviously under the hood there. Do you use open source stuff, or are you leveraging your own models, or?
Yeah, so for some customer deployments, like this is the magical thing about the space right now, where it's so competitive, which leads to all of these wacky deployment models, and you have Mistral in the EU for models that are particularly good in European languages. One challenge for us is our platform interviews people in natural language, in these conversational AI elements. So for us, we have to support all of these different languages. We have to have models that are very quick to respond. So sometimes we have to go for smaller models. And also sometimes we have security concerns. We have clients in Germany, for example, who need their data to stay in Germany. So we now need to deploy with open source models there. And I think one thing that you realize is that all of these models have their quirks. So trying to build a system that takes the trust out is super important. And I don't know if you played much with some of the open source models, but you do get some strange ones.
So this is what is funny about, there is so many models, as you say, and what I'm certainly finding is that they are all coming out with distinct personalities, whether it is intentional or not. Certain LLMs, certain pieces are better at certain things, and we certainly find you can really draw a personality out there. And I think a really good comparison is something like Grok compared with Gemini, right? Gemini, we always find, is too positive sometimes, right? It is too easy and too, we'll jump to tell you that you're right and your ideas are groundbreaking and all the rest of it. You flip that over to Grok, and Claude's in the middle there, but Grok will, no holds barred, tell you exactly what is wrong and all the rest of it. And actually you want those different perspectives sometimes. And it kind of goes back to that human thing, right? What are we trying to replicate? There is no perfect human that we're trying to replicate with AI. So that personality is an interesting thing. And the reason why I think it's relevant to the conversation is around confidence.
Yeah.
So you touched upon it earlier. When an LLM says something, it says it with absolute confidence. It is not saying, "Oh, I'm not sure," whatever. It will say, "This is the answer." There's a little bit of nuance in there. Sometimes it will highlight some grey areas, but we are very used to talking with people, and if they are speaking with confidence, we take what they're saying at face value. And the problem with LLMs is we're asking it to do all of the legwork, all of the research and things like that. So we're losing the ability to critique them.
Yeah.
And they're telling us that it's all good and all right and everything else. What have we lost there in terms of being able to kind of see through that confidence? Because we've all been hoodwinked by a salesperson or this person or that. Confidence means something, and it means something in a really definitive way when it comes to producing answers. And I think we need to be really careful. I mean, we do this all the time. Matt, I'm sure you have as well. Very heavily used Gemini as it was kind of part of a stack that we used, and we ended up shifting away because it would just constantly tell us that we're right.
Yeah, you feel like you're getting more done because it's just like, yep.
Yeah.
But then you realize that it could have been different.
I had like a 2-week hole where I emerged, and I said to Ben, I was like, I'm going to change the world.
Yeah.
And I put it all into Claude, and it turns out it was all trash.
Yeah.
But it is interesting, and obviously these are all interesting subjects, but what does it mean in terms of putting on the ground? Like for us, obviously we're using third-party systems, and we're putting that into effect for our clients, and that has its own sort of challenges. But Matt, you've now made 2 AI systems. How have you tackled these sorts of things? I mean, we've got hallucinations, we've got data and training issues, we've got personalities. I mean, Aries has its own personality all to itself. I was laughing at it yesterday. It's almost too nice.
It can be, yeah.
I know. And I was just saying before, and I talked about the uncanny valley. The voice interface gets you even closer, right? And a big part of that is if the conversation doesn't flow naturally, you'll bounce off it almost immediately.
Yeah.
If it's not snappy enough, if it doesn't sound just right, you'll just go, okay, this is odd. I can't have this conversation. So there's a real barrier there if you don't get it right. And you seem to have got it right pretty much, I think. But that's just one factor, isn't there? There has to be a whole range of things that you've put in place not just engender trust, but also to enforce it, I'm guessing.
Yeah, it's pretty difficult. Like, this is probably the thing that we spent the most time on in building Aries. Ultimately, the personality is felt by everyone who talks to it. And there's such a range of people who will talk to it that you need to kind of strike balance between something that feels like it's a good use of, say, 20 minutes of their time to talk to, and something that's actually productive in what it does. So I think for us, there's a whole range of things that we have to factor in when we were building the system. One of which you mentioned, it kind of got me thinking, which is for a long time, actually, OpenAI in their prompting guides had this segment about giving the AI an out.
Yep.
The AI models naturally, as you said, are very agreeable. Yeah, they want to give you an answer even if one doesn't exist, which is when you get hallucinations.
Exactly.
And they want to give you an answer even when you're wrong, which is the sycophantic behavior that you would see from Gemini. And I think one of the things that is magical about an LLM is if you say, well, a right answer could be giving no answer or giving an answer where you say you don't know. This works in like the system prompting. It's also something they're putting in post-training now to mean that models are far more likely to say that they don't know, hence why we're getting lower hallucination rates in these newer models. But there's also factors of like, okay, so we've got this out in the model. Well, now we have to say, give this same thing in Germany. And it needs to provide its voice in German, which is a whole set of challenges. But also, like, the German way of talking is very different.
It's not just a language, is it?
It's
There's
not.
actually a cultural thing behind that personality.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
The things you say are pretty tricky. So we've then got to bring in people from Germany to help us kind of factor that in. Luckily, a great guy who's on our board of directors is German. You can say that the last board meeting was very productive in that sense. And then a few things to mention. Obviously, our system, once you do those voice interviews at scale, and we've solved all the problems with its personality, with this, one big aspect of what we do is we try to synthesize findings from all of that amalgamation of conversations that we've had. And this is, again, a huge challenge because now we're asking AI to look at vast amounts of data. And what you need to do in those scenarios is build a system that self-checks, right? It goes back in. There's multiple agents, actually, one that will check the work of the other. And you almost say, well, you're going to be rewarded if you find an error. So one agent's trying not to make an error, but could. And then the next agent, which is doing the reviewing, is hell-bent on finding errors. And sometimes that works actually to detriment because it will pick up tiny things that you're like, this is a waste. But the system design plays a lot into how you make a trustworthy AI system.
So you said something really interesting then, which I'm going to pick you up on if you don't mind. You said that you've trained the system or you've configured the system to suggest that the agent would get rewarded if it does its job well. How does that work? Because how does it even understand the notion of a reward, let alone how are you rewarding it?
Yeah, so I think it comes down to like the agreeable nature of the models.
Right.
They want to submit an answer to you, ultimately. I mean, it's what they've been entirely post-trained on, is input, and then you output some tokens that you think are good. And in those scenarios, like what we will do is we'll give the model a tool where it's like submit final response. And you can even do grading with another agent where it submits, another agent reviews, and it sends back this is a B, this is an A. And you can do that kind of in an agentic system that goes back and forth to make that answer better. So you can reward the model by teaching it that, hey, if you're going to submit an answer, it better be good. And yeah, there's like a million techniques in that space, and we pick a few and try and like see if it does yield a better outcome.
Yeah.
But also one aspect of this that I think is worth talking about is benchmarking. So if you can put together your own benchmarks to say what good looks like, and really define out, okay, here's my success criteria. This is ultimately going to yield like a model or a system that you can design to kind of maximize your kind of happiness with it.
So a combination of sort of guardrails around how agents operate in cahoots with one another, sort of in an adversarial network, but also testing and continuous review of their performance
Exactly.
against known good benchmarks is a kind of
Well,
You know,
I almost think there's three
Yeah.
things to draw out from there. There's the training. So what data have we given it initially? The prompting, which is what data are we giving it right now? And then things like human in the loop as well, right? And it's almost like that off-ramp that you were talking about. Most LLMs want to give you an answer that at least at the face of it answers your question, even if it doesn't properly answer it. It might be hallucinating, but that's why hallucinations occur, is that it's trying to answer a question, it's joining the dots, and they're sort of not there. So I know certainly for us, the first line of defense, if you like, when it comes to making sure that we can mitigate against this is prompting, right? And as you say, saying things like, you can give me a null answer, right? That is a correct answer. If the answer is nothing, tell me nothing. Don't just say whatever. And I'm always surprised at how much we have to build that in, right? We build a lot of agents that require big prompts and step-by-step guides and things like that. And you do have to explicitly say, no is a correct answer, right? That is a valid answer. The fact that you have to say it is a little bit of a flag because if you don't say it, you're implicitly saying, well, it's not going to tell me no, even if no is the right answer.
In some way, though, like the way that we've been brought up is our prompting to suggest that, you know, you can say no. I even feel, you know, if a customer asks me a question and it's so far out of the realm of like, it's very deep into the system or something like that, obviously there is some intrinsic part of me that doesn't want to say no.
Yeah.
But as I've kind of gone through these meetings, I understand that's better than me just pulling out the bag anything I can think of on the spot. So I guess it's similar for the models as well.
Well, and so I actually really, that resonates with me. I want to say yes and answer every question. And it took me a while to realize that I don't know, or I'll take this away and come back to you, is not only a reasonable response, but actually garners more trust. And we find this a lot, like saying no is actually a more trustworthy answer than just spieling off a load of stuff that no one's going to understand. And whether that's in the AI world or even just us with our clients, right? We anecdotally find that if we say no to a client, they will come back with something else because they trust our opinion.
That's really interesting. I think this then lends itself quite nicely to the topic of how can you put in place additional guardrails, and there's been a few examples of some pretty bad things happening in systems when those guardrails don't exist. So I don't know if anyone wants to expand on the things that we've seen.
Well, there was very famously a case, I can't remember the company now, I know we were talking about this before, but where they were using an LLM, I won't name and shame it right here, but an LLM to do a lot of coding, that might give it away, and it deleted their production database, and as you can imagine, caused no end of pain for them and their customers, and a lot of money, right? It's not just about reputation, it's also tangible, you know, there's money on the line here, there's time and effort and all the rest of it. That's the scary side of it, right? That is the, you know, if you don't do the right things, this is what could happen. And it is more than just one thing, right? It is a combination of guardrails, it's prompting, it's training, and it's human. We haven't really touched on human in the loop, but with a get off ramp, that ramp needs to go somewhere. And for me, that goes to a human, right? And so having the ability to bring humans in is probably the most important thing if these entities are going to say no.
I literally had that happen to me today. I'm not even lying. So I was working on a solution I've been developing using Claude Code. I'm going to name it. Been developing this for a long time. I have a local implementation on my Mac, and then I have a hosted version on Azure. They use a different database, uses Chroma locally. I was just doing some run-of-the-mill patching earlier, and it completely wiped everything in Chroma. Just completely wiped it. And then to your point, it said, yeah, I've wiped everything in Chroma. I don't really know how. I think this is probably what happened. One of the agents I spun up didn't listen to my guardrails. It was his fault. Pretty much, he just blamed the agent. And it was like, okay, can I get it back? It was like, no, probably not.
But it's local.
It's a local DB. And it was a, you know, it's a dev database anyway. It wasn't important. The problem is I didn't know any different, right?
Yeah.
And I have an inherent degree of trust that it's not going to do that, but it's just proved me wrong immediately. So the first thing I did is I say, can you now check my Azure database and tell me whether that's secure? Because I don't want that happening. At which point it came back with a whole load of really constructive things to put in place, backups, certain settings to make sure that couldn't happen in practice. It didn't proffer that before, that might have been useful. But it just goes to show you can't trust it to always do the right thing or be proactive.
Exactly,
You still have to know the things to ask and the things. So on that point, I know we're getting close to time here, but I just wanted to ask something. How important is the human in the loop still in this process? How important are we to this equation still?
It's the most important thing, I would say, as in the LLMs, they're incredibly intelligent, but we talk a lot about good enough, right? For certain tasks, they were good enough a while ago.
Yeah.
And the new model is coming out like it's great, but ultimately we could probably solve a lot of problems with what we got now or what we got previously. There is always going to be a gray area. There is always going to, and there should be. Again, like we compare it to humans or perfection. If we shouldn't be, comparing it with perfection. There's no such thing. If you look at the corpus of data on the internet or what it's been trained on, you cannot draw a straight line and say this is the truth, right? There's contradictory information. There's all sorts of stuff out there. I really believe that perfection is not something that is achievable in this sphere. So if you take that out, there's a gray area. Who do you want to answer that? Do you want the LLM to answer it, or do you want us to answer it? That is why it's so important.
Maybe like an LLM version of me eventually, but not right now.
But funnily enough, this is kind of what you were describing, and we've talked about this a lot. In enterprise processing, I really don't think we'll be talking about single agents. What we will be talking about is a line of agents for each specific task, even if it's just doing one thing. So maybe you're getting it to write some marketing material or something like that. One will do the writing, and then you'll have another agent, which is the role or persona of your legal team, and then the role or persona of your marketing team and your sales team, and each chipping in and doing exactly that, right? Imagine there is a room full of people and you have paid them all to have these opinions. You want to get all of these opinions. And by being selective about what you're asking them, think of this legally, think of this in marketing, think of this as sales goes, you're getting rid of all of the fluff. You're getting rid of a lot of the contradictions. And you're saying, how do we make this better just for sales? How do we make this better just for legal? And by having those opinions, you can begin to kind of chip away at the initial response and get to something that I think we would recognize as a robust output.
So to my point that I made earlier then, which you're now validating, thank you, Dylan, the less human you make it, the more utility goes up.
I am a big believer in this, that to get AI to act like us, we still haven't done right, and we will probably still pursue because we have this inherent.
We have to. Somebody has to create. Yeah,
we're here to
sentient AI,
replicate ourselves in one way or the other, right? So I think we'll still pursue it, but actually, I think more and more in an enterprise setting, it is up to people like us collectively to say no. You don't need, Gemini 15 or whatever it is. You need a small open source model that I know will reliably give you that output every single time. And that it's small, it's specific, it knows what it does, and it does it very, very well.
Yeah, so I think it comes down to like building the right kind of sequence of things that happen, the right models, the right harnesses, the right roles and structures for every single part of that pipeline to get something good. And also, I think on the idea of perfect that we're talking about, we don't expect that of a human, right? We don't hire an intern into the business, give them access to the production database, and just pray that they don't delete it, or expect them to be perfect to the degree that they couldn't do damage. So we shouldn't have that same kind of expectation for an AI, whether it be Gemini 15 or a tiny model. We should just put in place the kind of responsible guardrails depending on what we've got.
It's funny, I know we need to wrap up, but just very, very quickly on that point, because I think we were talking about the idea that these AIs are almost like perpetual trainees. And one of the ways that you can mitigate against this is hard guardrails, right? Yeah. It's not just about a prompt saying, don't do this. Don't give it access to delete the whole database. You wouldn't do that to a trainee, right? Treat them like a perpetual trainee, because A, you're going to need to hold their hand probably forever. You will still know better than them for the context of your business, but also don't give it the keys to the castle.
And for God's sake, have a backup as well.
And have a backup.
That's a big one.
That almost feels like it should be the closing
line.
Have a backup. To have a backup. Yeah. But it's not. So Matt, could you, for the benefit of our listeners here, could you give a few words of advice? If they're starting to listening to what we've been discussing, they're thinking, well, actually, what can I do? What should I be doing? We're already using AI across our business, but maybe we haven't really, built this into our psyche, into our operating model yet. What would be your first words of advice about how they can start to address this problem?
Yeah, well, thank you for giving me the last kind of word. I'll try and make this count. I think in summary, like from the conversations we've had today and the summaries of the conversations we've had in the past as well in this topic, the big thing is AI is becoming more trustworthy, progressively so. But trust is a target that's impossible to truly reach, right? It's never going to be 100%. So putting in the right systems, having the right people guide the systems is so key to like deploying this safely. What I will say is there's such a change in the world going on, and it's something that we're part of at Aries, trying to help businesses kind of get the truth from the ground and figure that out. And you guys working with your clients and pushing that forward and implementing it with them. For us, it's like, you can't miss this. So the only route you can have in terms of trust is to build out, the right systems and to kind of adopt a framework internally that you can all agree on to say, this is where we know AI will have its strengths. Here are the weaknesses. How can we mitigate for those weaknesses? How can we ensure that we can all go to sleep at night knowing we have the backups, knowing that we have the right permissions for these? And hopefully, as the models get smarter and smarter, which we think that they will, then we'll be able to relax a bit more and sleep a bit longer in, and we'll see where that goes. But ultimately, trust is going to be this thing that you have with people, that you'll have with agents, and that you'll probably never want to let go of. So putting in place a framework is the right way to go.
And have a backup.
And have a backup.
Yeah.
Need that.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Matt, thank you so much, Dylan. As always, been an absolute pleasure.
Always.
I think that brings it to a close. Really great podcast. Really enjoyed the conversation. We could have gone on for hours. Couldn't we?
We
Let's be
literally,
honest.
we
really
already
could have
had to curtail ourselves because we could have been here all afternoon. But
Indeed. And for the benefit of the listeners, if you're watching or listening to this on our socials, please do tap us up in the comments if you want to know more. Otherwise, we look forward to speaking to you again next time.
Do we know the subject for next time?
I don't believe we do.
It'll be something exciting, I'm sure.
It'll be something crazy, something wild and wacky.
I look forward to hearing it.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Amazing. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.